your perspective on what this signals in terms of the drive of the government to tackle corruption?
Yeah, thank you. So I think one way to look at it is in a more holistic manner, government is trying to curb corruption. I think that's probably a bigger concern and focus for the current government than, the attempt to get tax revenue from those individuals. I have my own concerns about if you identify 50 people at this particular time when they run up to the election, whether people would misinterpret that to be a political witch hunt rather than something that is well intended. But if you look at both the executive order 6 and the current one on the voluntary offshore asset regularization, the focus again is on corruption. Whether that in itself will help Nigeria address its revenue challenge, it's a question that is up there in the air. Because really, if you get even these people to declare those assets and pay the one-off tax that government is asking them to pay, it's not going to expand the tax base of Nigeria. Maybe it will help a little bit with current year and maybe next year, but that's where it ends, because whatever income those assets then generate subsequently, because they are foreign assets, by law in Nigeria are exempted from tax. And really, when you're trying to address your revenue challenges, you're looking at expanding your tax base in a sustainable manner. That's really the focus.
Right. And of course, we know that the FIRS and other agencies have been a lot more aggressive in terms of trying to mobilize taxes for the government. Would you say there is any significant change in the culture in, say, corporate Nigeria with respect to taxes, and of course the individual Nigerian who should be paying taxes as well?
Yeah, so I do acknowledge the efforts that are being made by tax authorities, from FRS to the Joint Tax Board to customs to state tax authorities. But I think that to a very large extent we tend to be focusing on the wrong things. If you look at the Pareto principle, you expect that 80% of the effect will come from 20% of the causes. So, but what we tend to do is we're focusing on the 80% that produces only 20% of the effect, in the sense that you have the poor people, the middle class, people in employment, private sector, public sector, are really the guys who are paying. If you look at customs and our policy around trade tariff, we tend to be taxing input, materials, production, rather than focusing on how people can actually invest in a more efficient way to produce more. If you look at all of this, for example, there was a report that the Auditor General for the Federation released that shows that even the Presidency and the National Assembly have not remitted taxes for their employees. Now, and this is more like an indication of what you see at the top level. If we keep focusing on the poor people who are struggling, it doesn't matter that you increase the number of taxpayers by 5 million, you increase the number of companies by 800,000, you won't get the revenue, because really the focus now needs to start shifting to the top people in the society, and government has to lead by example by doing the right thing and reforming the tax system so that it enables businesses.
I hear you when you say all of that. But all that said, though, many will also say that there is a significant need to change the culture in the country. I mean, I speak to quite a few people, and there's just that sense that the government over the years haven't done much, and so there's that reluctance to pay the taxes that are due and are legal. And as a result, you still need that pressure from the authorities to remind everyone that they should be paying their fair share. And of course, the more controversial moves that we've seen recently is, if you like, the FIRS using what the law has permitted them to do to get the attention of taxpayers by going, if you like, to their bank account and placing a hold on those who have some questions to answer in that respect. Would you say they're going too far with that?
No, they're not going too far. Your question about the tax culture and the attitude of Nigerians towards paying taxes is a fundamental question. And I do agree there needs to be pressure from the tax authorities. So that's what you find, almost anywhere in the world. It's just that you need to balance it. So on one hand, you're trying to freeze bank accounts, you're trying to chase taxpayers. All that is fine, so long as you follow due process and you are diligent. So don't go and freeze the account of a wrong taxpayer just because you didn't get your data right. So all that is fine. But the other angle to it is that first, you're trying to enforce tax compliance using laws that are out of date. Look at the Stamp Duty Act, law of 1939. You apply it to transfer of money from just 1,000 naira. You're really making the vulnerable people to pay taxes more than they should pay. Look at the value-added tax law. You don't have a threshold, which means even if you are selling, cola nuts and biscuits, and your turnover is 1,000 naira a day, you need to register for VAT and file returns. Look at personal income tax. We don't have thresholds. In most countries, like in the UK, if you earn £11,000 a year or less, you don't even pay income tax. I was speaking to a friend in Malta. They said, in Malta, if you earn about 10,000 or 11,000 euros in a year, you don't pay income tax. Now, if you look at all of this, while you're putting pressure and you're trying to be aggressive as the tax authority, you must ensure that you reform the tax system so that you go after the people that you need to go after. You must protect the vulnerable and then enable businesses so that when businesses thrive, take property tax, for example. It's a huge revenue earning for many governments around the world. But you need to reform land taxes and land laws. If the laws to do with land property and transfer of title is easier to deal with, then you find that people declare the real value of their property. It's easy to transfer the title, and then they pay the taxes. So if you reform, look at visa policy. A lot of people can't even come to Nigeria, even with visa on arrival. Why can't we just allow people from Europe, from the US to come to Nigeria like you do in Dubai, Mauritius? And when you open up that tourism sector, you create a lot of employment, and they pay PAYE, you consume, and then you pay VAT. We need to stop looking at tax as something in isolation. We need to start looking at it as something that is connected to the prosperity of the economy, of the society, and of companies, such that in the end, as the economy prospers, then you make more tax revenue. I think that's the way we need to go.
All right. I think it's an interesting point you're making. It's all about reforms, and many of those reforms are way overdue. But I want to get your thoughts on what this election cycle could mean for those reforms, because I know you are in some of those committees trying to reform the tax system in Nigeria. Are you concerned that we're probably going to park this bus for now and then probably pick it up again after the election cycle? Because as you've mentioned, these reforms are way overdue.
Yes. I am concerned. We have the national tax policy that was approved by FEC in 2017. But really, policy is not what we say we're going to do, is what we actually do. So in terms of implementation, we haven't made much progress. And I do worry now that because of elections, not only from the executive side, there can be slowdown in those efforts. But I'm even more worried about the National Assembly, because a lot of the reforms that we need require enactment, either changes to the current laws or introducing new ones altogether. But they seem now to be only just focusing on politics. We shouldn't hold everybody to ransom and ground the economy to a halt just because we want to conduct an election. So these things happen all over the world, and politicians need to learn to multitask and also prioritize. Ultimately, it should be about the benefits and the purpose of the people rather than individual interests of politicians, whoever they might be.
All right, I just wanted you to just reflect on a final point here before we go on the need for that non-oil revenue base to move up, as the IMF has suggested. When you take a look at the budget over the years, and I've been making this point for a while, we'll see that it's growing somewhere around 20-25% each year, but the oil revenues, indeed the government revenues as a whole, tend to grow at a much slower rate, maybe about 5%. So the budget deficit continues to widen. Do you get the sense that we're at a critical point here in terms of reforming how this government and subsequent governments are able to raise non-oil revenues?
Yes, indeed. Reliance on oil revenue has proven over the years to be not sustainable because we cannot control the variables. Not even the production per day is totally within our control, let alone the price at which we sell. So ultimately, the focus has to shift to non-oil revenue. And for non-oil revenue to be at a point where it can sustain our growth, our development, and government expenditure, there has to be a careful thought about so many things. From the revenue that you generate at state level, which we don't often talk about enough, to the revenue that you generate from imports in terms of trade taxes, as well as the ones from the FRS. The budget deficit will continue to grow if we allow our expenditure profile to grow faster than our revenue. Even based on current profile, we have more than 2 trillion of budget deficits. Now, if we increase this again, the revenue that we're going to spend in the next year budget, you find that this gap will widen. Now, what IMF is saying is very obvious, and they're just saying the obvious. The external debt of these governments in just about 3 years is increasing from about $7 billion to about 17 billion. If you add the latest request of 2.8 billion euro bond, ultimately you cannot continue to increase your debt profile when your revenue is rising slower than the growth in your revenue. So we need to take a step back and think about medium to long term. What can we do? This miracle will not happen overnight. If we think about it from a medium to long term perspective, you can then start thinking about a lot of reforms that can give you revenue that is sustainable to fund the budget. You may still have deficits, but it should not be at the level we have it currently. If we argue that we don't have a debt problem, then we do clearly have a revenue challenge that has to be addressed quickly.